1628, a brand new ship left the Netherlands, proudly flying the flag of the Dutch East India Company. Her name was Batavia. She carried riches, ambition, and a man who was planning a mutiny. But before reaching her destination, she smashed into a reef. Over 200 survivors were stranded on a remote island. And that's when the real horror began. Murder, torture, slavery, led not by pirates, but by one of their own. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of one of the darkest chapters in maritime history. The Batavia was a newly built flagship of the Dutch East India Company, or VOC. It was on its maiden voyage from the Netherlands to Java. Aboard were over 340 people: sailors, soldiers, merchants, women, and even children. Commanding the ship, Captain Arjen Jacobs and upper merchant Francisco Pelsaert. But there was a third figure, one that history would not forget: Jeronimus Cornelisz, an apothecary and a madman. As the Batavia sailed around Africa, tensions rose. Captain Jacobs and Cornelisz formed a dangerous alliance. Their plan: take over the vessel, kill the officers, and steal the VOC's silver. Cornelisz dreamed of becoming a pirate king, but fate would intervene with real disaster. On June 4th, 1629, the Batavia struck a reef off the west coast of Australia, the Houtman Abrolhos Islands. The ship was destroyed. Over 200 survivors scrambled onto tiny islands with no fresh water, little food, and no hope. Captain Pelsaert, along with Jacobs and a small crew, took a longboat and sailed north to Java, seeking rescue. They left behind Jeronimus Cornelisz and chaos. Cornelisz took control of the stranded survivors. He seized all weapons, formed a private army, and declared himself ruler. Then, the killings began. One by one, anyone who opposed him was executed. Babies were drowned. Men were stabbed or starved. In total, over 120 people were murdered in just a few weeks by their own crewmates. Cornelisz wasn't just violent, he was calculated. Before the bloodshed began, he carefully isolated his targets, divided the survivors, and silenced dissent. He told them rescue would never come, that their only hope of survival was to follow him. He banned prayer, destroyed morale, and ruled with psychological fear. People began to turn on each other. Some joined him just to stay alive. Others disappeared quietly. No one dared to ask how. Cornelisz created a world where he was judge, jury, and executioner. And the line between survival and complicity grew thinner by the day. But not everyone gave in. On another nearby island, a soldier named Wiebbe Hayes led a group of survivors. They had no weapons, but they had courage. Hayes built a fortress, crafted spears, and trained his men to resist. When Cornelisz's thugs attacked, Hayes and his men fought back and won. After 2 months, Pelsaert returned with a rescue ship. He was horrified by what he found. Cornelisz and his followers were captured. Executions were immediate. Some were hanged. Others had their hands chopped off. 2 were marooned alive on the Australian coast, left to die. Only a few people survived the Batavia ordeal. The wreck lay lost for centuries, until 1963, when it was discovered off the Australian coast. Today, you can see parts of the original Batavia in museums. It's a chilling reminder of how power, greed, and isolation can unleash the darkest sides of human nature. The wreck of the Batavia is now just wood and rust, scattered across the sea floor off the coast of Western Australia. The bones are gone. The fire is out. The screaming has faded. But what happened there, on that barren island in 1629, still matters. It wasn't just a shipwreck. It wasn't even just a massacre. It was a moment where civilization itself broke apart, where a handful of desperate people were cut loose from rules, laws, and morals, and had to decide what came next. Some chose violence, some chose obedience, and some, like Wiebbe Hayes and his men, chose resistance, courage, and humanity. Not because it was safe, but because it was right. What Jeronimus Cornelisz did was not madness. It was something worse. It was method. He understood that fear is a weapon, that hunger makes people easy to command, and that silence is the first thing to die when survival becomes a game of power. He didn't just kill people, he reshaped the rules of life on that island and forced others to play his version of morality. And that is what makes the Batavia story so terrifying. Not the blood, not the bodies, but how ordinary men followed, and how easily it could happen again. Today, the VOC is remembered in museum walls and national archives. We celebrate its global reach, its economic brilliance. But beneath that golden surface lies a much darker current. The Batavia reminds us that history is not always written by the victors. Sometimes it's buried by the survivors. And if we forget what happened there, we risk repeating it. Because in the end, civilization is only ever one shipwreck away. The story of the Batavia is not just about a shipwreck. It's about how fast civilization collapses when there are no rules. What would you have done, stranded on that island? If this story gripped you, subscribe now, because we uncover more true stories from the Dutch East India Company. Real voyages, real power, real horror. And tell us in the comments, should Wiebbe Hayes be remembered as a forgotten national hero